Chords if I want to get fancy in the middle of a solo or something, or do an octave up or an octave down, it'll do almost anything. Reverbs and choruses and delays and distortions. There's a zillion things in here effects-wise, and they're all super ultra high quality. So as far as effects go, though I say normally I don't use any, when I have the luxury of using this rack, I'll take this out with me, because sometimes in certain situations it can be really handy to do in the middle of a solo or a special effect in a song, something like that. So that's the only real effects I use, and that's what these are for. That's why I ignored this before, because I can do a show with or without it, but it's nice to have it. So basically, again, let me reiterate where I'm at here. I'm plugged into this Ampeg preamp, one input. It has two channels. I have one on all the time, the clean channel, this one here. Oops, I got to turn my effects off, sorry. In the clean channel, I got a little EQ, extra EQ on it with this parametric equalizer plugged in, and I have some extra compression on it too. It also has another channel. I'll play that channel alone for you, so you see what I mean. Just alone, it's kind of useless distortion fuzz that you could never use as a bass tone. Maybe as a special effect on a record, but it's a real smooth tone. It's full of harmonics. By itself, pretty useless. But then when we have it together with the other tone, start to hear the note more, then add in the low, starts to sound more like a real bass. So that's basically the principle here. Two-channel preamp with a clean sound that's always on, distortion that I can turn on off with by either here or by a foot switch, a separate amp doing low frequencies, and that's basically my setup and how it works. All right, here's the back end of the rack that we've been looking at from the front. I'll show you some of the ins and outs and what some of all this stuff does from the other side, so you can get an idea how this is all hooked together. Basically, the rack is usually very, very clean, and no wires are hanging out like this at all. A very good friend of mine, Mr. Thomas Nordig from his company Time Speed, had just rewired my whole rack last night, so I hope he doesn't get mad at me, my little experimentation. Normally these things aren't hanging out here at all like this. I just did it today for experimental purposes. But Thomas did an amazing job of making my rack clean and easy, so anyone can plug it in very easy. Thank you, Thomas. Anyway, basically, here's that preamp I was talking about on the front, the Ampeg preamp. And as you notice, there's a loops in each channel, the two channels, clean channel and distortion. What I did in this particular instance for this experiment, when I'm trying to migrate this into my system and eliminate the pierce up here because it's old, basically I do a send to an EQ, that parametric EQ you saw in the front that was sticking out of the EQ into a compressor that I explained to you, out of the compressor again, back into the preamp. So the clean channel has a little bit of extra EQ and extra compression on it in order to give me more variations, just more choices about how I'm going to tweak it out. Because when you're playing live and performing, sometimes the littlest things, the littlest change can make a big difference in how you feel and how your hands feel on the instrument. So for me, I like to be able to go in there and fine-tune things. Some guys aren't necessarily like that. Once you get a sound and a tone, you're done with it and that's it. But I just happen to like that personally, so this gives me the opportunity to do that. The overdrive channel, the distortion channel, doesn't have anything in its send and return. What I ultimately would do is plug that into the noise gate, which is here. Because with the distortion channels, you're getting a lot of gain, you're getting a little bit of hiss. And just to get the system very, very quiet, what I would probably do is put a noise gate across that in this send and return. That would keep the system, could be up very loud and you wouldn't hear any noise or any hiss. That's what I'll eventually do with that. Here's the preamp out. That goes into the inside the first SVT, the top one that I use for the high frequencies. And one thing I do, remember I told you about the biamping and the crossover. The Ampeg has automatic biamping built in. So what I do is I just take the output from the high frequency, you can see it's still on, and plug it in into one of the two power amps. So basically I'm only using half of the amp, and I'm using all the low frequencies trimmed off by the control in the front for this crossover. Basically what I do is it has two outputs, high frequency output and a low frequency output. Normally you take the high frequency output, run into half of the amp, low frequency in the other half and amp mixed together, amp. high frequency power amp, low frequency power amp, and they would both run in their separate speaker cabinets. But I only use the high frequency only. I don't use the low because I'm using it just to trim low frequencies off. So the biamp out into one of the power amps, speaker out to the speaker. Here we have the effects loop where the Eventide is plugged into here. Easy enough. The lower SVT is for my low frequency sounds. The effects loops, I have an extra compressor plugged in there for a little more compression. Nothing else changed. Power amp out. My pizza's ready. I gotta go microwave some pizza. I think it's ready. Power amp out to speakers, ready to go. Spare amp sitting right there. So basically that's the back end. I have some AC power set up and a Furman power strip up at the top to plug everything out in, keep it nice and neat. Actually, I didn't keep it nice and neat. My friend Thomas actually did all this wiring. But basically that's the setup from behind. Just wanted to give you a chance to see it from behind so you kind of get the full view of how all this works. Now, again, this is a very complicated setup. Basically, I can do a show with just one amp, I'm fine. But when I have the luxury of adding all this extra stuff, it makes things easier and more optimum for me to do that. You may want to get into this and experiment and add a lot more things. The only reason I did it again is over the years of continual tweaking. I know this gear really well and I know how to troubleshoot it really well. So when I'm on stage and something goes wrong, I know how to get to it right away. If you set yourself up with a lot of gear, too complicated right up front, what's going to happen is if you have a problem on stage, you might not know what to do with it. So really be sure of it before you start adding it in and start using it. That's a very important point. But basically, I get a lot of questions about how this all works. So I hope that this explanation kind of brought into view a little bit more to give you an idea of how this works, how it was put together and why, and all that. So that's the back view.